Ho ho ho! Welcome everybody to the final video of this year's Dragon December, a month dedicated purely to the dragons of D&D. I like to illustrate and talk about the lore and mythology and legend of these creatures, especially with a build-up to my favourite holiday of the year, Christmas. But I hope you have a fantastic holiday, no matter what kind you are celebrating. And with this being not only the final video of Dragon December this year, but my final video of 2021, I thought it was fitting that we cover one of the dragon gods. And I asked my patrons over on Patreon which one they would like to see, which one they'd like to hear the mythology and lore of. And they picked Kurtulmak, the god of Kobolds. So grab a mince pie and some eggnog and let's get started with today's video. Usually, I'm not a fan of actually covering D&D lore exclusive characters. I like to study monsters and creatures, species and people that you can use in any setting, in any time period. Things that are entrenched in real-world mythology that apply to everyone. So even if you homebrew your own setting that is as unique as you can imagine, then my videos will still be something that you can use or draw upon and find interesting. The deities and specific demon lords of Dungeons & Dragons canon lore are usually quite restricting. They don't have to be, mind you. You can include anything you want in your games. But having a named character appear in your campaigns implies to me at least that you are using an official setting laid out by Wizards of the Coast, or something like it. So I tend to avoid it because I personally have no interest in hemming you in like that. I personally like to write homebrew campaign worlds and use the rules and monsters I find to fit into my world where I need them, rather than writing stories in existing worlds. That's not for everyone, and I totally get it, but today's topic is drenched in D&D official lore, so I'll try and pick out the useful tidbits where I can to help you use this character in as much versatility as possible. Also, I can, of course, make an exception for any creature whose burning hatred for gnomes rivals my own, and so we arrive at the topic of today's video, Kurtulmak, the Horned Sorcerer, the Watcher, the Devourer, Steel Scale, Stingtail, Gnome Smasher, God of the Kobolds. Finding Kurtulmak's official in-game origins has been kind of difficult, actually. Just like his children, he's hard to pin down, if not maybe more so. But the earliest artwork I could find comes to us from the AD&D Deities and Demigods supplement published in 1980, where he's described as, quote, a lesser god who appears as a giant kobold. By giant kobold here, they specify that he is 5.5 feet tall, with scales of steel and a tail with a poisonous stinger, end quote. The artwork itself, penned by Errol Otis, a well-known American illustrator and game designer, looks less draconic than modern kobolds, and less canine than kobolds depicted in those early editions, but seems to resemble a sort of pug-nosed goblin covered in scales with a long and wiry tail which terminates in a sickle-like sting. Since then, his appearance has changed to look more draconic, more often than not appearing with green skin and red attire rather than steely, I suppose, grey or silver-looking scales. Even since those early depictions, he's shown wielding a spear-like staff, which I'll explore in greater depth later. In 5th edition, we're introduced to Kurtulmak in a passage on page 64 of Volo's Guide to Monsters, which tells us, the god of Kobolds was a vassal of Tiamat. When the gnome god Gal Glittergold stole treasure from Tiamat's hoard, she sent Kurtulmak to retrieve it. Gal lured his pursuer into a maze-like cavern, then collapsed the exits behind him, trapping Kurtulmak for all eternity. Kurtulmak is a hateful deity, one who despises all life except for kobolds. He especially hates Gal Glittergold, gnomes, and the fey creatures that enjoy playing pranks. He taught the first kobolds how to mine, tunnel, hide, and ambush. He's dominated by his emotions. Intelligent, but not wise. Arrogant, and prone to gloating, he carries grudges, has a huge chip on his shoulder, and spends a lot of time fashioning elaborate revenge scenarios against those who have disrespected him. As for future embellishments, in this most recent edition, I can only assume that we may discover more lore surrounding this creature in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which at the time of writing this and researching this video had not actually come out yet, but by the time you're watching this, it should have launched, so you may know more than I do about this curious and devious deity. Kurtulmak is always described as 5 to 6 feet tall, and usually is a kobold of some description, which I suppose he cannot technically be, if he is to be believed, as he also claims to have created the race of kobolds, so he can't be in their number and also their creator. There is a chance he's something else. A friend and I mused that Kurtulmak may just be a completely average height, if a bit shorter than usual perhaps, dragonborn sorcerer who has either never seen another dragonborn or is happy to deceive the miniature kobold community of his divinity. But official D&D lore canon tells us that Kurtulmak was created by a green dragon, known as Caesinsjach, Caesinsjach, who, because that's an absolute mouthful, I'm going to call Kay for the rest of this video. And she created Kurtulmak to be one of her servants. Kay, at least according to kobold records, was one of the very first dragons created by Asgarath, the primal dragon god of creation, who would later be bisected, forming the two better-known dragon deities, Tiamat and Bahamut, both of whom I've covered in previous Dragon December videos, if you'd like to learn more about them. The kobolds, at least, believe that when Asgarath taught each of their earliest creations how to form their own life forms, Kay was the first to put this into practice, and her very first creation was Kurtulmak, who she tasked with creating a vast and regal lair. Pleased with the palace of tunnels, the cathedral to her glory, she set Kurtulmak free, but before she did, she also created the first kobolds for him to rule over and lead. It's not clear if these were a gift to Kurtulmak, or if the kobolds were created to be his servants in the excavation of this great palace that would become Kay's lair, but the kobolds largely saw Kurtulmak as a good leader. It's at this point that the stories tend to diverge, and the truth of Kurtulmak's legend split between those more favourably told stories, uttered from the mouths of kobold kind, and those less flattering told by the gnomish people. According to the at the time newly created species of gnomes, kobolds had started to enslave their fledgling society to work as miners and labourers, harvesting their unborn souls in the form of gemstones. Glittergold, deity of the gnomish people, attempted to put a stop to this by collapsing the mountain which all kobolds called their home, slaying them all, and in some stories, himself in the process, allowing the gnomish people to rise from the ashes of this conflict. Taking pity on their plight, some say that Asgarath, creator god of dragons, then resurrected both Garl and Kurtulmak and transformed them into gods to watch over their respective people. Kurtulmak then used his newfound, deified state to recreate the kobold people from the ground up. However, in kobold stories of Kurtulmak's ascension to godhood, it's Glittergold who's the thief, not of gnomish or kobold souls, but instead of treasure, a nondescript treasure which was part of Tiamat's treasure hoard. Tiamat, who has by this point been separated from Bahamut, Asgarath therefore has been slain, or bisected into two gods, and in the form of Tiamat, tasks Kurtulmak with retrieving the treasure that Garl stole from her hoard. The stories end very similarly though, with Glittergold deceiving Kurtulmak, luring him into a network of tunnels beneath the mountain, and then collapsing said mountain upon him. Garl manages to flee this mountain, but Kurtulmak is trapped forever. Regardless of the mess that is D&D's mythology and the various retellings that have trickled down and been filtered through the mouths of numerous species of creatures in different generations, the results are similar enough. Kurtulmak is a 5 to 6 foot tall kobold god who embodies everything that kobold society strives for. He is, by their standards, tall, most kobolds being about 3 feet. He's strong and capable when it comes to fighting, famous for wielding a magical spear which doubles as a mage's staff. He has a poisonous tail like a wyvern and is a tunneler, a leader and an escape artist. He's a very potent spellcaster, legendary for supposedly stealing the power of arcane sorcery from a dragon god and teaching it, or passing it on to his people, much like the legend of Prometheus bringing fire and technology of the gods to humankind. He's a servant of either Tiamat or the other dragon gods, but usually Tiamat, and hates the trickery and deception of other creatures. He harbours a particular vitriolic hatred for Glittergold and all gnomish people, going so far as to make the skull of a gnome the symbol of his worship. I don't know really how you distinguish the skull of a gnome from other humanoid skulls. Maybe they're just small, like kind of the skulls that you'd get in sort of Halloween shops and things as decorations. Now, while I have your attention, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, without whom this content would not exist. Making these videos is a huge undertaking. It takes up a massive amount of my time, and I consider it work. So my patrons over on Patreon essentially pay me for the time that it takes to make this content, to make this entertainment. For a lot of them, that's £1 a month, which is already paying me more than YouTube advertising will do for this video's entire lifetime. But those of them who pay me the price of a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, once a month, and above deserve special mention. And this month they are Raptor Dio, Duck Quack, Nicholas G. Silver, Jonathan Foster, George Punton, Napin Camo, Yorick Beast, The Smiling Sadist, Amanda and Jake Westfall, Ethan Dibby, Nathan Stratton, Bartle Gruff the Great, Braxton Hudson, Cav Manic, Matt Lichtenwallner, Halfie Wolf, Peter Balfe, Max Schluter, Darth Gaetana, Oliver Thorvald Mellock, Colby Monroe, Styrax, Ryan H., Steve Harrison, Max Copeland, Tamerling, Dan Waterman, Sam Hickson, Dominique Jolly, AJ, Christian Palmer-Smith, and of course Aldrin as well. So thank you to everyone on Patreon, but in particular, a massive thank you to all of these people who helped make this content. So if you enjoy this content, and if we were to meet in person, and you'd think to offer me a cup of coffee, then I'd urge you to go and check out Patreon. I'll leave a link down below in my description box where you can go to do that, and I really appreciate that. If that's something that you can't afford, then that's what these very, very generous souls are doing. They're paying for the people to watch this content who can't afford that. So thank you all so much for your help, and for paying for the viewers who can't pay for themselves. That's really kind of you. But I've diverted your attention for way too long now. So where was I? Oh yeah. In my depiction of Kurtulmak, I wanted to explore a few themes. Firstly, the word Kurtulmak, this god's name, is said to mean to escape in Turkish, but Google Translate also suggests that this might mean to be saved, and therefore making this a kind of aspirational figure seems like a good idea, but I definitely wanted him to seem sort of sneaky and cunning. Kobolds famously don't like tricks, but they do like traps. It's a confusing dichotomy. But I imagine this creature being a deity who teleports a lot. And whether it's just influence from years of reading Marvel comics and seeing characters like Infinity and Eternity, illustrated by Jack Kirby, creatures who seem to have the limitless span of galaxies hidden within the folds of their shadows, I like the idea of this being a way to represent a deified character. It's been picked up recently in the Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and I really like the way that looks. I've been trying to draw gods like that for years, but I think I finally cracked it with Kurtulmak. But even if that's not the way that you'd like to represent deities in your game, I think it certainly works for a deity who represents the ability to escape, to flee, to find safety, and to be saved perhaps by your own means, that the limitless vastness of space is just another material for him to be able to tunnel through and escape. But with these ties to Turkish origins in the name, I also wanted to take influence from Turkish dress when it comes to clothing Kurtulmak. Ancient Turkish soldiers did use a lot of spears and javelin-like weapons, so that definitely fits in with Kurtulmak's original theme. But they also used to wear a lot of draped fabrics, which were woolen on the inside, to make sure to keep warm, and usually hid some kind of armour underneath. Now, as a nimble escape artist, I felt like heavy plate armour was not perhaps a good idea, and initially with the first colour palette that I used here, I wanted to pay homage to the original idea that Kurtulmak was supposed to be steel-scaled. Usually when I see depictions of Kurtulmak, he has green skin, which is definitely what he ends up looking like at the end of my drawing. But that wasn't ultimately my intention. I tend to find a colour palette that I think will work well, and then shift with sliders to see what looks best at the end of my illustration. It just so happens that green skin worked for this guy, but my original intention was to have entirely silvery grey metallic skin, as per his original description. But then there's also the fact that K, his creator god, supposedly the first dragon created by Asgarath, or Bahamut and Tiamat together, was a god, or a goddess rather, of green dragons. She was the first green dragon. And with chromatic dragons being creatures who are so self-obsessed, so self-absorbed, viewing creatures of all other scale colours as inferior, it does make sense that perhaps her first creation would also, even though diminutive in stature by comparison to herself, appear with green scales. But anyway, I had loads of fun drawing this character, which I wasn't expecting. Kobolds are so much fun. They're great creatures to put in your game, and I really enjoyed making this guy. I decided not to homebrew any stats for Kurtulmak. I often find it better when deities don't have stats. You can use them for whatever you need them to be. And like I say, there's also the chance that he will appear in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which I'm hoping I will be clutching in my hands right now while you guys watch this video. But while I'm recording this, my copy is still waiting somewhere in an Amazon fulfillment center. But today's video wraps up Dragon December. And I hope it was as much of a gift to you as it was for me. I really enjoyed this year's edition, so I hope you'll rejoin me at the start of 2022. While I won't be going for a dragon-based theme going into the new year, I will next December. I'm so excited for what we can do with the channel together. I hope you had a fantastic Christmas if you've just celebrated that, and are looking forward to New Year celebrations. As for me, I'm going to cozy up with a nice glass of mulled wine and mince pie and relax for the rest of the year. In fact, I plan to relax so much that you won't hear anything from me during the month of January. I've got a lot to prepare for, and I'm hoping that I can do some pretty exciting things with my return. So until the first Monday of February 2022, I hope you have a wonderful holiday. I hope you relax. And I hope that all malevolent dragons near your adventuring party fear your name. And until next year, happy monster hunting.